Hey everyone, my guest today is Nicola Kraus. Nicola co-authored the Nanny Diaries, which became an international #1 bestseller, selling over 6 million copies in 32 languages and inspiring the movie starring Scarlett Johansson and Alicia Keys. In addition to co-authoring 9 more novels, Nicola has contributed to the London Times, New York Times, Redbook, Glamour, and Town and Country. In 2015, she co-founded the creative consulting firm The Finished Thought, which helps the next generation of aspiring authors find their voice and audience. And most recently, she has debuted with her first solo novel, which I read, The Best We Could Hope For. Welcome, Nicola, to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I need to change my bio to say starring Scarlett Johansson, Alicia Keys, and you.
That's true. That's true. And a up and comer Laura Linney. I feel really hopeful for all of those
Right? They've
people.
all done so well.
It's incredible. It is sort of extraordinary. I know exactly where I was in place and time in my life because when I was cast in the Nanny Diaries, I was originally offered a larger role, and then it turned out I was quite pregnant by the time filming began. And the extraordinary husband and wife director team were like,
hmm
"Love Alana, we will find something for her." And so I ended up playing the whiny mom. Um, but Julie White is an extraordinarily glorious, talented actress who is also a dear friend of mine who sort of ran the TED Talk mommy part of the film. Um, and so now we are on celluloid together. So it's
Yes.
really wonderful, wonderful.
Please tell Julie that Emma and I went to see The Little Dog Laughed 3 times
Yes,
because we
it's
were
incredible.
so obsessed with her performance. It really changed us.
Wow.
I think we'd never seen the dynamic that we were in so often in the industry depicted on stage before. For those of you who don't know, it's a play wherein she played an agent who has a sort of Machiavellian relationship with her client. And people outside the business couldn't believe that agents actually talk to their clients like that, but they do.
Right, right.
And it was so funny and also very cathartic for us.
That's so amazing. And so Emma, who you just mentioned, was your co-author, and you have generally co-authored mostly in your career when we're talking novels, not articles and other things that you've done. And so this latest adventure in writing is something that you wrote on your own. So I want to talk about your new book, but maybe if you don't mind, we did start, and we're joking. I'm not the star of the Nanny Diaries at all, but I do have a cameo that is great fun to have as part of my own resume in life as an actor. Um, Tell me about, I mean, I remember when that book came out and Nannies Everywhere and then Humans Everywhere were completely absorbed in this book that sort of revealed life on the Upper East Side in a very authentic way through the eyes of a visitor to that world, a nanny. And I want to know if you can take us back to your experiences, how that book came to be, and then the kind of, as I said, I mean, how many languages was that book printed in and a movie, etc. Can you just take us back to that kind of very, what I imagine, heady time for you was?
Well, it began like most good stories begin with someone just needing a job.
Hmm.
I just needed to figure out how to make money while I was going to NYU. New York City is a very expensive city to live in, especially as a student. And I hated having desk jobs. It is very funny to me that I've ended up having one for the last 25 years. But working with kids, it also complemented my studies. I was doing child development and I adored it. It was great. At least the children were great. The parents oftentimes were terrible. But I never imagined that I would write about the experience or that it would somehow turn into the cornerstone of my career. It really was just a one foot in front of the other situation. And then I graduated. I also started acting. And by the time I was 24, I just kept thinking, this isn't a good use of my time on this planet. And I was looking into doing my pre-med pre-requirements at Hunter, and I was teaching yoga, and I'd written a play. I thought one of these 3 paths will lead me out of the wilderness. And I invited Emma, who had gone to NYU with me. We'd actually nannied for some of the same families. I asked her to a reading of the play, and she emailed me the next day and said, I've had this idea to write a book about nannying. Would you do it with me? And my very first thought was, that is a terrible idea because it was a heartbreaking job. I couldn't imagine anyone would ever want to read about the world of play dates and grocery shopping and getting talked down to all the time. She was very right. I was very wrong, but we just rolled up our sleeves and got to it. We treated it like a homework assignment because
Uh-huh.
we are both, we're both good girls. We like to get our homework in on time. And we actually wrote it on a 24-hour clock because she was working full time for a .com as the head of HR. So she would pick up around midnight and write till 3 a.m. And then I would get up at 6 a.m. It was a time before PCs and Macs could talk to each other. So I would start my morning by getting her scenes in an email and retyping them into into a Word doc, and then I would pick up and I would keep going. And that is why relatively we wrote it pretty quickly. And then everything that took off from there shocked us to our socks.
When can you get into the process a little bit? So
Mhm,
you were first time authors at the time. Did you outline it? Did you kind of, before you put, I guess,
mhm,
hand to keyboard, not pen to
mhm.
paper, sort of track, okay, let's narrow it down. It's going to be this fictionalized family and this story and this happens. Like, how did you begin the process?
We were very structured about it because there were two of us and we knew we needed to be explicit about each step of it. Emma worked with someone whose mother was in publishing, and she very kindly gave us a few minutes of her time. And she said, you should write an outline and a chapter. So we actually created a 26-page outline. And the finished book is pretty close to that outline. And we also wrote what became the prologue. So the first time we sat down together, we started reminiscing. And that was where we realized there was something systemic worth talking about. It's only really worth satirizing something if you're calling a larger system into question. And by the end of that conversation, we were pretty convinced that we were. So I would say, oh, remember how she's always wearing those riding pants and a striped t-shirt? And Emma would say, remember how she always tours you to the kitchen, but never has any idea where anything is? And
Yeah.
remember how the kid is always in the farthest possible corner of the home? So we divvied that up. And she took a few sections. I took a few sections. She sent me hers during the week, but I was the first person to string all of that together. And
Okay.
that is the prologue. It has never been edited from that moment. And you cannot tell where one of us stops and the other one starts. And that's when I knew, even before she did, oh, there's something special here. This is really unusual. And that proved to be true throughout our entire collaboration. We often think that the other person wrote something that we love. And then they're
Wow.
like, no, you wrote it. No, you wrote it.
Wow. One brain, two heads.
One brain, two heads. Truly, we really feel like somewhere along the line, a soul got split by accident. So we shared that sensibility, but when it came to the structure piece of it, we'd met in a great books program at the Gallatin School at NYU. So we'd just come off of 3 years of reading.
Okay.
And Emma's father is a college professor. My father is a rare book dealer. My mother was a librarian. We both grew up in households where books were everything. And so we humbled ourselves to the process. We really tried to study what made the books we loved work and then follow that, which is pretty miraculous because neither of us have MFAs.
Right.
And we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants, but from a place of total humility.
So how long did the actual process of writing the book take? And then when the book was finished, how did it become something, a title everybody knows globally?
I wish I knew, but I mean, I can tell you the things that happened, but each one of them is spookier than the next. So we sold the book in June and we delivered the first draft of it in November. It's almost impossible to sell fiction on spec now, especially with two authors. I will tell you, they paid us $25,000, which was their idea of we'll never get this money back. That number would now have been $3,000, but
Right.
this was in the before times.
Wow.
And we were determined to prove them wrong. So we very diligently wrote the first draft, and then our editor said to us, it doesn't really have a plot. And we said, you mean a mystery? Something that the primary character doesn't know at the beginning but finds out at the end? No, just a plot. Could Mrs. X be a kleptomaniac? And we said, no, absolutely not. So we went off and we racked our brains for days and days. We couldn't leave each other's side. We felt like we had to crack this. And then I don't remember which one of us it was, but the idea surfaced of Nanny finding Mrs. X in the apartment, and not Mrs. X, Miss Chicago. And
Right,
as soon as she did that, suddenly she had a little bit of power and
right.
she had a choice to make. And that did make the whole second half of the novel crackle. And now it's a problem we would have solved right up front, but we didn't know any better. So then we set about doing a rewrite and we delivered the final draft in May. And I had my phone number at the bottom of the manuscript. I didn't know any different. And what happened was while Emma was on her honeymoon, I got a call one night, or I got 5 or 6 calls, saying that first there was a message from someone saying, you don't know me, but I'm your film agent. Had no idea that that person existed. And Harvey Weinstein has set a 20-minute clock. Universal is also bidding, but probably Harvey is going to take it. I need you to approve this right now. The next message was from Richard Gladstein, the original producer on the film, saying that Judi Dench was going to play Grandma, and on and on. I called the first person back. I said, it's delightful to meet you. However, Emma is on her honeymoon. I'm not authorized to accept or reject anything without consulting with her. And I used to work for Miramax as a reader. If Harvey wants it in 20 minutes, he'll want it in 2 hours. You just tell him to sit tight. And I don't think anyone, I don't think she was counting on that response. Like, yes, this is, I did not just fall off the apple tree. So I called Emma. I got a hold of her at a clam shack on St. Bart's. She apparently put the receiver down and shouted out to the whole restaurant, does anyone here work in film or television? I
Oh,
need advice.
stop it.
Years later, she was on vacation at another resort, and a woman came up to her and said, I just need to tell you, I was in that clam shack. And it's one of the, and we thought you were crazy until that movie came out.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Um, okay. So Miramax got the rights
Yes.
to this film. I also remember, again, as I said, because I was pregnant in that movie, I know it was 19 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, what happened in terms of all of New York City, a very specific community, being sort of on high alert that this book had come out? There were so many people wondering which family it was, and there were articles about it, and it was sort of like a cultural moment, right? It really hit a nerve. Can you talk a little bit, not just about the great fortune of, it being made into a
Mhm.
movie, but sort of how that felt to have exposed something? You weren't journalists, you were just sort of young women taking your story and fictionalizing it.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about what that was to feel that buzz and concern, maybe also.
It's funny. I think because we were in a bit of a bubble, Emma was living on 103rd and Broadway, and I was living in the Village. So even though I'd grown up on the Upper East Side, my parents were still on the Upper East Side. I wasn't really aware of the gossip factor of what was happening. So I was certainly receiving that through the media, but I never know if the media is real, right? It's just someone's assignment to create a few inches of copy. And so they'll be like, everyone is talking about it. I'm like, is that two people?
Right.
And what our lived experience was being on the other end of it, going into bookstores, and it would be just full of nannies who had come. Some of them had brought their charges. They had tears in their eyes. They were so grateful to us for giving them something to point to about how much they loved their jobs
Mm.
and their sense of self and their sense of identity. And so that was what we were experiencing. The other side of it to us sort of seemed like media nonsense, but maybe there was more scuttlebutt than I'm aware of.
Right, but it didn't, but it's only your experience I'm interested in. So that's really fascinating to know that in your sort of direct line of communication with publicists or people
Mhm.
reaching out to you, you were only getting sort of positive and thank you, and
Yes.
not we're gonna, you got to kill that story sort of.
Yeah. No, and I think that there was a misperception maybe that we had worked for one family or that there was a Mrs. X. No, we worked for dozens of families and nobody was that. You certainly no one was that entertaining. We pulled a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B.
Yeah.
Honestly, we made Greer a boy only because it was going to create a pronoun challenge if you
Mm.
had two adult women and a 4-year-old girl in one room.
Right,
So
right.
suddenly you had a son, and people were like, oh, I know what family that is. You couldn't possibly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So once this kind of happens and the cast really was, Paul Giamatti, on and on and
Mm,
on. I mean, it was really extraordinary. Were you at all, I know most writers, unless they write the screenplay, and even if they do, they often feel like the least involved on set when
mm,
their movie is happening. Can you
mm,
talk a little bit about as first-time authors now being optioned for a film?
mm.
Once the deal was made, how much were you a part of the actual experience of the movie?
It's funny because I think that there's been a real shift in the industry. So I'm going to say that this was still a part of what I would call 1900s thinking, where you keep the author as far away as possible. And I'm sure that that originated out of authors who were initially inflexible or would come in saying, but you've changed this, you've changed that. And Emma and I are collaborators. We never come at anything from that place. So Nanny was filming around the corner from my father's gallery on Madison Avenue, and I happened to walk by. And I went up to someone with a walkie-talkie and I said, hi, I wrote the book. Can I come in? And so that's how we got to meet Bob and Sherry. And Bob came out and he was apologetic. He said, we aged Greer up. I said, of course you did. He said, we had to get rid of grandma. I was like, of course you did. And by the end of the day, they brought us in to meet Scarlett. And Bob and Sherry were standing there, and Bob said, you're so sane.
Yeah,
Yes, we get it. It's a different medium. You have to tell a different story to put something up on screen. So I think in hindsight, and we became very good friends with Bob and Sherry on the strike line the following Christmas, but it would
right,
have been nice, I think, because we did have thoughts, but we also very much understood our place.
right,
Now, in comparable adaptation scenarios in this century, it's very different. I think there's an understanding that actually there's a real value to be tapped in at least bringing in the author as an executive producer. You hearing them out once,
right.
because it could be that they're like Margaret Atwood, who is just completely at peace
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
with
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
happens and is thrilled and delighted, but can also add a lot of value.
When the book comes out and it's immediately sort of, it seemed to me in my memory a bestseller. Did you guys automatically know what you wanted to do next?
We actually did. We'd had an idea because there was a very long lag time. We turned the book in May and it came out the following March, which, in your 20s, you could have written 7 books in that time. Now I'm like, that's a hot minute. I could get nothing done.
Right.
But we had the idea for our second novel, Citizen Girl, which to us felt very much of a piece. It was looking at the rise of third wave feminism, which was really just sexism repackaged as feminism. It was when Hooters had an airline. It was cake parties and Girls Gone Wild, and and which coincided with the Iraq War, right? So it was a very much like a 1940s for the boys, women knowing their place, women as sex objects again. It felt very regressive to us, and that was the birth. Plus, it was the rise of the internet. And the internet is for porn, as Avenue Q will tell you. And so we wanted to put all of those pieces together, and that was Citizen Girl. And amazingly, all these years later, one of the joys of sticking around as long as I have is we now know women who read that book when they were in college, who've gone on to careers in law enforcement, working in sex trafficking. And that's extraordinary that to have had that, basically you're writing entertainment and then to be able to have that kind of impact is amazing. For some people, they're like, wait, what? I don't want to read about feminism. I just want to read about children.
Right.
But for other readers, like, oh, I get it. You write about women who are smart, who are put in jobs where everyone says you're the asshole, and it takes them the entire book to turn around and go, no, you're the asshole,
As it turns out.
as it turns out.
I a lot of my listeners will know that, I host this Brian Park reading series,
Mhm,
which is such a delight and such a value add to my life that
mhm,
every week I know I'm going to sit in the middle of New York City with people who write books and people who love books as much as I do.
mhm,
And that is where you and I met first. And the reason you were there is you had just birthed your newest novel. And I want to talk about what, 9, 10 books later,
mhm,
um, this idea of sort of, being part of a girl band and then having a
mhm,
solo career all of a sudden. How did you decide like this was the time? How did this idea become the one that you wanted to write on your
mhm.
own without a co-pilot? What was the thinking and the sort of creative impetus for this particular, your newest book?
Emma and I always had such deep fear that something was going to come between us, that her husband would get transferred and she would need to move away. Now, in the world of Zoom, there's no concern about geographical relocation whatsoever. But we used to work side by side much of the week. And so we were always afraid that marriage, children, something would pull us apart. And none of that came to pass. We were in our early 40s and we were tired. I didn't want to keep going with our shared voice as much as I tremendously enjoyed working with Emma. I wanted to work in different genres. And Emma wanted to go back to corporate America. She wanted to make a total 180 out of the business. So we each wanted that for the other. And Emma knew I'd had this idea for the book that became the best we could hope for a long time. And also knew that it was outside of our shared voice and really wanted me to have the time and space to do it. When we first separated, my initial thought was, well, now I need to give myself a grant because I've never not been under contract before. So that's when I started the finished thought. So I split my time between working with aspiring authors, CEOs, professors, and then carving out the time to tell this story, which is a mother-daughter story. It takes place between 1943 and 2014, and it looks at two sisters from a very dysfunctional family who are split up in their late teens when one runs away from home, and the older sister ends up taking in her younger sister's three children that she's had by three different men in three different communal living situations in the early 1970s. And then when this younger sister, Bunny, returns into their lives, everything blows up. And then the next generation has to try to figure out what happened, who is at fault, who should be forgiven, and how do any of us move forward. So I wanted to tell a story over a really long time span. My novels with Emma, we always told them over a really tight time frame, and it's a lot harder. It took me 8 years, but it was
You're
worth it.
also shepherding many other people's, helping to shepherd
Yes.
other work. You've been like a midwife for a lot of people. Um, the finished thought, which is what a great name
Mhm.
for a business that you created. It makes so much sense. Do, Mike, I guess I want to know, do you think anyone can write?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that if you feel called to share your internal life in a written format, you should absolutely pursue that. I can't promise that everyone is going to get published or that everyone is going to be on the New York Times bestseller list,
Right.
but there hasn't been anyone that I've worked with who hasn't seen their life change in some way for engaging with the story that was calling them.
when you start, I mean, I assume sometimes you work one-on-one. I'm sure you do classes as
Mhm.
well, writing workshops. Do you have sort of a, just as a takeaway for people
Mhm.
listening, you know, there are people at all kind of varying levels of both commitment, time, and just lived experience
Mhm.
as a creative artist, in this case as a writer. Do you kind of always start, like, if you had a TED talk,
Mhm.
do you sort of start with the same sentence or idea when you begin working with someone or a group of people?
If I'm working one-on-one with someone, I always start with their goals.
Okay.
What do you where do you want to get to and where do you want to get out of that? What do you want to get out of this? And it differs. When I first started doing this, I had the assumption that everyone wanted to get an agent, that everyone wanted to be published by one of the big five, and that's not always true. I've worked with people who want to be published by a hybrid publisher. For example, one of my clients, Ron Bahar, he is the head of pediatric gastroenterology at UCLA. He's got a very full life,
Right.
but he was raised Jewish by Indian parents in Nebraska,
Right.
who, of course, wanted him to marry a good Jewish girl. And he said, but where? And fell in love with, the blonde, blue-eyed Christian down the road. And it's a beautiful coming of age love story. But he just wanted to tell it.
Right.
He didn't want to spend months and months and months lost in the process. So
Right.
I always start with what is the idea of success that you have? And then how can we get you there? And that's what I work backward from.
And I assume so that's sort of the sort of end product of the thing that you write, right?
Hmm.
But in terms of writing the thing and
Hmm.
doing the thing, I mean, I know, everyone's like, well, writers write. That's what you have to do. You have to treat it like a job, and some days
Hmm.
your job goes well, and some days your job feels less exciting, but you have to write to be a
Yes.
writer. Do you do exercises? Do you have like, do you start off with a prompt basically, or it depends on whether you're just working with a group of writers who haven't started a thing versus you have a something, I would show you something that I've been working on.
I have positioned myself as more of a personal trainer for people's creative processes so I can tailor it to what they want to do.
Amazing.
So the reason for asking them about their goals is as if they say, I just want to have done this, I will give them so much more creative latitude. But if someone comes to me and says, I've sent this out to 20 agents and I haven't gotten a bite yet, then I will say to them, as someone who deeply understands the industry, here's what you need to do. And I will give them very explicit homework.
Got it.
This needs to get restructured, that needs to move. You understand working in film and in theater, there's math involved. And oftentimes, artists can get undisciplined. We can all get undisciplined. But if you want your art to meet the marketplace, if that is the goal, then we need to figure out how to make the thing you feel creatively called to do match what editors and agents are looking for. And I think decoding that is kind of my superpower.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, the idea that you can do the thing and then help others do the thing is such beautiful. I mean, talk about paying it forward, because you had tremendous success very early on. And to your point, sort of there was a lot of magic, right,
Hmm.
that happened
Yes,
around it. Like, there
absolutely.
was the thing that you made, this book that really spoke to people. I love this idea that it really, more than anything, became a place when you went on your book tours or met people, for people to thank you for sort of allowing them to be seen in ways that they might not have felt before. What a powerful, powerful thing to be
It
in those conversations, I imagine.
It really was. We were so grateful. And this was not only across the country, but in Europe as well. Even in places like Holland that has socialized childcare, we still were getting the same response from women. And so it always felt so much bigger than one neighborhood or one family or even one nanny. It felt like we were talking to something that was unfortunately universal.
Mhm. In your latest novel, which really focuses on sort of I mean, this is a phrase that gets bandied about so much, but generational trauma,
Hmm.
um, the sins of the father, sort of all
Hmm.
ways in which we go through life with our lived experience and then some version of an emotion that may not even be ours, but it lives within us. And I found the book to be so, it's not my personal story, but it
Hmm.
is so relatable. I mean, I'm not raising other people's
Hmm.
children, although I do think there's something about you as a storyteller, if you go full circle, your stories are about people raising other people's children along with their own.
Yes.
Um, and I thought it's really interesting how it's a similar tagline in
Hmm.
certain ways, yet it is such a completely different story. And I was just so wowed by the through line and yet your ability to come at it from such a different perspective.
Oh,
Your
thank you.
prose, it's so beautiful and so moving. What was your hope for this book?
Oh, thank you. And I just had wanted to say that when I first read My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout, which is the first in her Lucy books that she
Did
went
you
on to
see
win the
Laura
Pulitzer
Linney
for.
do? Did you see Laura in the
I
play?
did, I
Yeah.
did. And in the novel, Lucy goes to take a writing workshop, and the woman leading the workshop says to her, writers only write about one thing. Each author has their own, they just come at it over and over again in different ways. And that made me feel so much better about writing this book because it does, in some ways, have the same obsessions as the Nanny Diaries. And I realized, okay, so the thing I'm really interested in is how parents fail their children, how children survive that and go on to thrive, and neglect in very, high scale places. That's
Yeah.
fine,
Yeah.
it's my niche. It's
Well,
what like fascinates
it's a
me.
very universal experience. So you're not alone.
Right? I mean, it's Greek, it's Shakespearean, people who seem like they should have everything who feel like they have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never get enough of it.
You will never get enough. And just this idea of parents disappearing and returning
Mhm.
and I have a friend who's a family court judge, and he's constantly, just telling me about you hear these stories, and yet the children always want to be with their parents. Like there's
Yeah, it's primal.
it's really primal the amount we will withstand to try to
Hmm.
stay in that relationship and try to make that work.
Yes, and we evolved to feel only safe when we are with someone who is biologically responsible for our arrival on Earth,
Yeah.
even in the absence of any logical reason to feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I often say there is no 2.0 human. We think we are so sophisticated because we've created these very sophisticated surroundings. But evolutionarily, in terms of how we respond to our surroundings, our cortisol levels, the way the brain internalizes threats and then holds on to those memories to be able to react to them again, all of it was designed to help us survive the savannah. None of it was designed to help us move through our very overstimulating modern world.
Yeah, it's true. I also just want audience and listeners to understand how funny Nicola's books are. Even though these themes are deep and complex, you're so funny, and
Oh,
there's so
thank
much
you.
levity and joy within these very real, very impactful scenarios. So congrats on this book. I
Oh, thank you.
wowed by you and your talent and your prose and also your generosity just as a human. And I'm so glad that I got to have this time with you. And before I let you go
Mhm.
to write book number 10, 11, 12, is there a little known fact about Nicola Kraus that you can share?
Yes, I have never told this publicly before, and maybe this is interesting only to me. But while I was writing the Nanny Diaries, my desk faced a window. That window faced into a science classroom where Scarlett Johansson's now husband, Colin Jost, was taking science because my parents' building abutted right into the Regis High School. I did not know any of this until I listened to his wonderful, hilarious memoir, A Very Punchable Face, during the pandemic. And I could not believe that he and I were probably passing each other on the street several times a day while I was writing the book that his wife would go on to star in the adaptation. So clearly, the three of us in a former life,
Yes.
we all lived in the same yurt.
Yes, you were all in the same yurt, or city. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm so thrilled that I got to talk to you. And here's to more conversations about creativity and books and art in the future. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Such a delight.